Welcome to Story Time with Chris James. And I will pick up right in that horrible spot where I left off last time. Sarah slid off the seat and tried to hide under the dash. Belle closed her eyes and held her hands across her chest with her fingers crossed. Pam looked left and right, trying to see a break in the wall of death she could use to drive them to freedom. The wall of zombies moved on both sides of the truck. As they brushed against the sides of the truck, it rocked back and forth. Pam was close to tears. She didn't want to see her friends die, and she sure didn't want to die with them. The wall of undead began to thin. The darkness soon swept in to fill the glass on both sides of the vehicle. Pam looked in the mirror. Then she craned her neck to see out the back window. The zombies were marching away into the night. Are we dead yet? This came from the floor under the dashboard. No, the zombies kept going. I guess they're en route to join King I'm-so-hep. There must have been thousands of them. Belle opened one eye. She felt all down the front of her body. Opening the other eye, she said, I wasn't scared much. Pam had to stop and think how to get the truck into gear. Her mind was overwrought with the last few days of near death. We're going to need more than one hero. She hoped this trip would pan out. The gravel road led out onto pavement. The pavement was clear of snow, but the sides of the road were covered in whiteness. Pam edged the speed up just a bit. The wipers were slapping back and forth. There's a sign. We're getting close. On the side of the road was a sign with a picture of a smiling man carrying a basket filled with money. Across the top it said, Guadalupe Mountains Casino, where luck is just a word for bounty. Pam looked at the face. Doesn't that guy look like an Indian to you? A feather, not Dot? Belle looked at the sign. Maybe some Indian got lucky. More like the casino owner on the way to the bank, Sarah quipped. They kept going with images of mercenaries and secret agents in their minds. Professor Wackenbottom was standing in the middle of the casino, wondering where everyone had gotten. They had arrived nearly 3 hours ago, only to find the casino staff had all left. The only people still here were the die-hard few gamblers, intent on putting just one more coin into their slot machines. All the lights were on, but hardly anyone worth knowing, was home. The professor had gotten his cell phone out and called the local authorities. He tried to explain what was going on back at the dig site, only to learn he was now standing in Oklahoma, not Texas. If he wanted to report a problem in the next state over, he would have to call another number. Just as he was punching in the number, Douglas had dropped a coin into a slot machine, pulled the lever, and hit a jackpot. A bell rang out as handfuls of coins cascaded down into the basket. This drew all the other students, as well as the professor, into trying their luck. Everyone had borrowed a few coins from the lucky guy and set out to become rich beyond their wildest dreams. That was 3 hours ago. After several dozen trips to the ATMs, conveniently located every few dozen feet, the students, along with one professor, were all feeling the effects of using one arm way too much. Anybody got any change? This machine is about to pay off big, but I need one more pull. This was from Priscilla. Douglas shied away from her, hoarding his last few coins to himself. It almost sounded like a growl had escaped from his lips. Bobby pulled the pocket out of his jeans to show he was tapped out. Everyone had used up their credit as well as their bank accounts. Professor Wackenbottom remembered there was an urgent matter in need of his immediate attention. "Uh, who has my cell phone? Anybody seen my cell?" He remembered setting it down, but not where. The other people in the casino were complaining about not being able to order drinks or snacks as they mindlessly sat there pulling on levers attached to what is better known as a one-armed bandit, for a very good reason. One of the casino employees had placed a sign on the door asking the last person out to please turn off the lights. Ham pulled up to the front doors and shut off the engine. It had been a white-knuckle drive for the last hour. The casino was a huge building with a hotel jutting up behind it. Okay, here is the plan. We go in and look for the guys with either a tuxedo or what looks like a mercenary's uniform on. She looked at her two companions. How do we convince them to help us? Pam had gotten that far with her plan. We give them cute, big brown eyes and fluttering eyelashes, Sarah tried. I could cast a spell, but I think my spell casting ability is somewhere in direct conflict with how urgent the situation is. Belle gave them a sheepish grin. We'll use reason and their overpowering need to help out in a dire state of affairs. Pam hoped this would work. The three jumped out and made a dash for the doors. The wind was colder than before. Once inside, they surveyed their surroundings. As far as the eye could see were flashing lights and bright colors. The room was mostly empty. The few people in view all looked like, well, tourists. There were lots of casually dressed people, mostly sitting in front of slot machines. No one even looked up when the two girls dressed like Egyptian escorting a mummy walked in. It would seem the casino guests that had stayed were well past the legal driving limit, or walking limit for that matter. You try that way, and we'll look over here. Meet back here in 5 minutes. Pam pointed Belle towards a row of machines running as far as the eye could see. They all noted that no one had a watch. Pam didn't want to send Sarah out by herself, considering they were in what she considered an adult environment. This was something Paula had said one time. This is an adult environment, meaning Pam should stick close. They had gone into the cosmetics department in the grocery store. Sarah felt as if she were being treated like a child. Oh, come on. How many times have I faced death and destruction with you? Pam considered this far worse. Ah, but this is something called vice. Oh, what's vice? Sarah looked around as if something might bite her. It's something people do that they probably shouldn't, but they do it anyway. Pam had come to the conclusion she didn't know what vice was or how you caught it, but she always thought this was an unreasonable activity. Does it hurt? Sarah had a feeling they were staying into some otherworldly dimension. Sometimes it does, something called the day after effect. Like it accumulates in your body like radiation? Sarah had been reading about radiation poisoning. More like it dissolves your bank account and sometimes your friends and family, Pam said, thinking about what Paula had told her. Oh, yuck! Sarah got up as close to Pam as she could. Belle had walked only a few yards when somebody shoved a hand in front of her. Here, I need another one of these. The hand was holding a glass. Belle looked at the glass. What do I look like? Some kind of maid? The woman in pink running suit that had never seen a track looked Belle from head to toe. Yes, Belle was about to tell this non-running pink thing what she could do with the glass when the woman turned back to her machine. After a few trips to the bar, Belle now had enough money to put a down payment on a car, if she'd known how to drive. Being the only one running back and forth delivering drinks, she was making out well on tips. Maybe I should look into working here and ditch the whole witch thing. Belle went looking for her next customer or victim. Pam looked high and low for a hero type or even a supporting man type. A sidekick would do right about now. She was constantly having to explain to folks that she didn't work for the casino and no, she could not replace an offered glass with a full one. Sarah grabbed Pam's arm even tighter. Look, over there. Those guys, they're dressed like soldiers. She was pointing to a bunch of guys all dressed in various forms of camouflage. Pam looked them over and thought if they weren't mercenaries, they must at least have been in the military. No two had the same pattern or amount of uniform, but they did all look like they had spent time hiding in the brush. They were all sitting around a table filled with empty drinks. A few of them looked to be asleep, more like unconscious. Let's ask them. Pam pulled her minion towards the group of men. As they drew near the men, the once still awake, all held out glasses or bottles. Fill her up, one of them said. Pam looked at the offered glass. We don't work here. We're looking for. Then why are you dressed like that other girlie? The semi sober man with way too much midsection said. He tried to point one finger, but nearly fell over instead. Pam followed the very unsteady finger, and there was Belle carrying a tray filled with drinks. She had a black lace apron on and a headband with a feather in it. As she stared, Belle smiled and waved at her. Pam drugged Sarah over to the witch. What are you doing? I thought we were here looking for heroes and fighters and things. Pam looked at Belle's new headgear, and the feather goes to the back, not the front. Shoot, lost my place. My computer decided now would be a good time to start messing around. Belle reached up and spun the feather around to the back. I've made over $800 so far. These people are so tanked they're handing out $20 tips. Oh, where'd you find the tray? No, wait a minute. We have to save the world from the Mummy King, remember? Can't it wait till my shift ends? Belle turned and went to deliver her load. Belle had no idea how to run a bar, but that wasn't stopping her. She would carry the empties over and dump them on the floor behind the counter. Then just pour a bunch of different bottles of liquor into fresh glasses and then go deliver. Pam watched as Belle moved from place to place, delivering overly enhanced drinks to overly inebriated customers. Since she never paid for the drinks, she was pocketing the entire exchange. Maybe we should give her a hand, Pam suggested. Maybe we should find us some sober heroes. Sarah had more money than any tween should because her dad overcompensated for his absence by giving her handfuls of cash. She was known to carry a wad of $100 bills just to go to the bookstore. Pam managed to catch Belle as she went sailing by. We need to focus on finding somebody to take care of that mummy. Belle looked at the tray in her hands and then at her two friends. Oh, all right. But as soon as we're done, can we come back? This is easier than mixing potions or catching spiders. Pam led her two fellow hunters towards the quieter end of the room. There were a few doors that opened on to private rooms. One had a sign that said, Poker Tournament, Stay Out. Pam opened the door. Inside were 4 men and 3 women. They were all stationed around a table with chips, not the kind you eat, and cards. The few who had drinks by their sides looked to be drinking soda. The air felt charged with energy. Everyone held their cards close to their bodies. Could you? Pam started. Shh! Came from several directions at once. Belle leaned in close behind one of the men. Wow, you have a lot of kings. The man whose hand she had just divulged threw his cards down on the table. What do you think you're? He looked at Belle. Her green skin kind of caught him off guard. All the other players all threw their cards down as well. It looked like a riot was about to get kicked off. Sarah jumped in to the rescue. While you guys are taking a break, could you direct us to a group of mercenaries who aren't too drunk to help us? This was a new one on everybody. They all did the, do you know what she's talking about? Look. Mercenaries? You interrupted our game for that? The guy who had 4 kings and an ace was turning purple. He looked like he wanted to strangle Belle, but without getting too close to her. Sarah tried again. Mercenaries. We need mercenaries to defeat Pam's new husband, the Mummy King. Would you stop calling him my husband? Pam tried to yell in a whisper. Well, you did marry him. I was forced. Pam was getting exasperated. You're still the Mummy Queen. Sarah crossed her arms as if to say, so there. The card players all noticed Pam's weird outfit. She was still wrapped from head to foot in linen bandages. Her face was the only part not covered. She had on the floor-length gown, but it was showing its age due to all the crawling and running in the past few hours. The golden cobra was visible through all the black hair. One of the card players whispered in a very loud voice, She does look like a mummy queen. Maybe we should. As if they all had the same idea, the card players all ran for the door. They all took great care to not get too close to Pam or Belle as they fled. Well, that worked out pretty good, Belle said as she looked around the room. Sarah looked from one to the other. Now what? We still don't have any heroes, and the Mummy King is building his army. Pam got a thinking hard look on her face. Maybe, just maybe. What, have you found the answer to all of our troubles? Sarah asked. I talked to the chief of this place yesterday. He sounded like he knew something about the tomb and King Imsohep. We might find something in his office. She led her fellow misadventurers out the door and over to the elevators. As they waited for the elevators, Pam looked out at the gamblers. There were fewer than before. Must be running out of cash. I think it's way past their bedtime. Belle pointed towards the front doors. The sun was coming up. No wonder I'm tired. We've been up all night. Pam stifled a yawn. Once the elevator arrived, they piled in, and Pam pushed the button for the second floor. We could have just taken the stairs, Belle said as they waited for the slow-moving conveyance to move from one floor to the next. On the second floor, they all began looking for anything that looked like administration offices. Over there, where it says main office, Sarah pointed. The door was slightly open. Pam stuck her head in and looked. Anyone home? She said as she stepped in. The outer office looked like somebody had left in a hurry. Papers were strewn about the floor. The next office was also open. Pam looked in at the mess. The former occupant had taken time to grab a few things as he made his mad dash. The walls of the office were covered with Indian artifacts, some quite old, while others looked more recent. Pam didn't know where to start. Belle, You take that side and look for anything that looks like an ancient weapon or maybe a magic wand. Magic wand? I'm on it. Belle began combing the shelves. Sarah, would you check the closet? Pam pointed towards the door. Sarah opened the door. This isn't a closet, it's a bathroom, and a very nasty one at that. Well, look anyway. We have to find a weapon to defeat the mummy, and we don't even know what it looks like. Pam went to the desk. Most of the drawers had been yanked open and only pushed part way shut. Pam opened each one and searched. She found a lot of old records involved in running any business. One drawer held nothing but pens. Some looked like they'd the kind you'd get from people advertising their business, while others were just cheap pens bought in bulk. She found a receipt with George's name written on it. Belle, can I borrow $385 from you? George will pay you back, or I will once we get out of here. Belle pulled a wad of bills from the apron she'd found. She peeled a few hundreds and some twenties. Pam set the receipt down in the middle of the desk, along with the cash. Sarah was looking around the bathroom. There was a cabinet filled with things you need before and after using the place. She lifted the carpet, but there was no secret trap door hidden under it. Pam sat back in the chair. She dug through each and every drawer, finding the only office things. No secret weapons, no magic wands, nothing that even suggested an ability to defeat a cockroach, let alone a mummy. She closed her eyes, just for a moment. You won't find what you're looking for here. Pam opened one eye. There was an old Indian sitting across the desk from her. He was dressed like a real Indian, not someone you'd see running around the casino. It only took Pam a second to realize he was a ghost. Can you tell me where to look, then? If you find this hard to understand, you obviously didn't read the last 7 books. You can just soldier ahead, taking what you read for granted, or stop right now, go back and read the other books, then come back to where you left off. It's your call. Or you can go back and listen to the other stories on the podcast. The ghost looked a bit lost. There is a place you can look for the solution to your problems, but I kind of forgot where it is. He looked embarrassed. Can you at least get us close? I think the sooner the better. The sun is up and the mummy is building an army. Pam was hoping for a quick, simple solution. The ghost stood up and walked to the window. See that mountain over there? He pointed. It's there somewhere. He dropped his hand. Pam looked over his shoulder. As she was about to ask another question, the ghost slowly faded away. Come on, we're in the wrong place. Pam headed for the door. The borrowed pickup was still parked in front of the doors. They jumped in, and Pam got them heading towards the mountain in the distance. How will we know where to look once we get there? Sarah asked. I don't know, but we'll see when we get there. Pam was worried the snow was going to be a problem. The road was covered in the white stuff. Pam had to grit her teeth and use all of her willpower to drive slowly and carefully in the direction that she needed to go. After a few miles, the paved road began to wind away from where they needed to be. Pam was desperately searching for a side road. Turn left, right there, Belle yelled. Pam hit the brakes and the truck slid past where Belle was pointing. As they went, the pickup did a slow turn. When they finally stopped, the truck was aimed back the way they had to go. That was cool. Where'd you learn to drive like that? The witch asked. You know, Pam didn't want to admit that it had been just luck. Pam started driving back to what looked like a side road. What makes you think this is the way? That sign said ancient Indian burial ground, so this must be the way. Belle looked quite pleased with herself. The side road was in fair shape. It wandered back and forth as if it had been laid out by a committee. It was going in the right direction, so Pam sat back and tried to relax. It was easy as long as she didn't think about what might lay ahead. Her brain did its best to keep all of her troubles front and center. The mountain wasn't a real mountain. It was just a few dozen feet in the air. It looked more like a mesa from out west, flat on top with straight sides all around. As they were nearing the mountain, there was a sign that said, Ancient Indian Burial Ground, followed with a closed sign. Pam came to a stop. What you doing? Sarah asked. It's closed. Pam pointed to the sign. She thought about why they were here. Ah, never mind. She drove on into the area. The road wound around the mountain that looked like a mesa, and they came to a parking lot. Kind of. It was a wide spot that looked like you were supposed to park in it. Pam stopped the truck. On one side was an old shack that looked like it was used for maintenance or storage or something. Let's see if we can find what we're looking for. She opened the door. It was about this time Pam remembered all their warm stuff was somewhere back in the entrance to the tomb. The cold air rushed in and attached itself to every exposed bit of skin. And let's do this quick. A trail ran away from them along the side of the mesa. It was bordered on one side by the rock wall and the other by cactus. They ran along the trail trying to be quick and to warm up a bit. Pam was just about ready to call it quits when she came around a corner and found an excavation site. There was a fence to keep them on one side and the Indian artifacts on the other. The only artifacts were holes in the ground. This is it? Pam looked for the magic stuff. This is it, Sarah asked. This is it? Belle said. All I see are holes in the ground. Sarah tried to close her eyes and then open them in case she was missing something. I'll bet all the cool stuff is back in that shack. Belle turned and headed back the way they'd come. Pam looked around, hoping she had missed something. Oh, let's go back before Belle breaks something. This was followed by the sound of glass breaking. Pam ran back to the parking lot in time to see Belle's running shoes disappearing through the broken window. Pam came to a stop as the door swung open. Did you have to break in? She looked past Belle's shoulder. Come on, there's all kinds of stuff in here. Belle turned back into the room. The walls were lined with shelves. The shelves were covered in things covered with cloth. Pam lifted one of the coverings and looked. There was a collection of bowls, most of which were cracked. She looked in one, but they were all empty. Sarah lifted the next cover to find a pair of grass sandals. Man, these look comfy. She lifted them down from the shelf. Holding one up to the bottom of her foot, she looked to see if they might fit. A bit big, but Sarah set them back on the shelf. They worked their way along the shelves in search of any magic-looking weapons, or anything that even looked like a weapon. What's this? Sarah held up a hand. She was holding a rock shaped into a figure 8. Oh, that's the head of a tomahawk. Pam had seen one in a museum once. Man, it would hurt to get bashed in the head by this thing, over and over until your head. Okay, I get the point. Now Pam had another image in her mind that she wished to forget. There's a whole box full of arrowheads in the corner, Belle told Pam. Pam thought about this for a second. Bring them. They might be important. She thought about it. Sarah, bring the tomahawks as well. The three had loaded up their arms with anything they thought might help. Now it was time to run back through the snow some more. Pam was getting sick of warming up and then freezing again, only to warm up and then freeze some more. If, no, when we get through, I'm never going to a cold place again. They piled everything into the bed of the truck, and then it was back to the cab and more heat. As they were pulling out into the paved road, a park official was just pulling in. He rolled his window down like he wanted to talk to them. Pam rolled hers down. Belle scrunched down in her seat so as to not be recognizable when the broken window was found. "Hey, girls, I'm just heading in to open up if you want to see the sight." He looked at Sarah, sitting right next to Pam. His eyes wandered over the top of Belle's head. He was just about to ask why they were dressed the way they were. We're running late. Maybe we'll come back later." She reached over and poked Belle. Pam held her hand under the witch's nose and wiggled her fingers. Belle tried to act like she didn't know what Pam meant. The finger under her nose wiggled faster. Belle peeled $100 bill from her wad and passed it to Pam. We noticed there was a broken window and somebody had stuck $100 bill under the sill. I think whoever broke it wanted to pay for the damage." Pam handed the money to the park official. The guy just stared at the money in his hand. "Gotta go. See ya." Pam hit the gas. Pam drove straight back to the casino. She stopped in her usual spot, jumped out. "I'll be right back," she yelled as she ran for the doors. The professor was herding his class towards the door when a mummy came storming in. He was close to turning and running when he noticed it was the girl staying down the road in the cabin. "Hey, Pam, you want to be careful. There's some weird looking creatures running around the campsite." He looked suspiciously at Pam's outfit. Pam slowed down just enough to be polite. Howdy, Professor. How's everything?" She looked at her wrist. Her watch was still missing. "Oh, look at the time. I gotta go." She ran for the elevators. The professor watched that weird girl run away. "I wonder where the other two are." He stepped out the door. Belle was sitting in the old beat up pickup. "Hey, that's my truck." Bobby looked at the witch sitting in his vehicle. Belle rolled the window down. "What was that?" She gave him a look. "You're sitting in my truck." The student looked over his ride. "No, I'm not. This is her dad's pickup. Just ask her." Belle pointed to Sarah. Uh, Sarah tried to act like she was asleep. Belle poked her in the arm. "Wake up and vouch for me saying this truck belongs to your father." Pam ran into Chief Walking Eagle's office. She grabbed all the bows and arrows and tomahawks and anything that looked like a weapon. With her arms full, she staggered back to the elevators. Pam had to walk fast across the lobby. Her running was just about used up. After a quick side trip into the gift shop, she opened the doors and walked quickly over to Belle and Sarah. Pam looked at the two standing there, a pile of ancient looking artifacts at their feet. "Where's the truck?" Getting washed." Belle tried to look convincing. Sarah was standing next to Belle. "Well, the owner showed up and kind of insisted on getting it back." Pam looked around the parking lot as if just maybe there might be a vehicle sitting there with the engine running and nobody in it. Sarah felt just about horrible after her inability to keep the owner of the vehicle that they had stolen from re-stealing it back. "What are we going to do? The Mummy King will raise his army and conquer the world, and we'll have to find someplace new to live." "Wait here some more, and don't lose any of the rest of the stuff we stole." Pam ran back inside once more. "We're getting way too used to taking other people's stuff." Pam thought as she might have to look into some kind of a confession or something. Pam made for the casino. She strolled along as fast as she could. Several people handed her glasses asking for more alcohol. Pam took the empty glasses and handed them to other drunks who didn't realize they were a glass completely empty until they tried to drink. Pam walked over to the guys in camouflage. "Hey guys, how y'all doing?" she asked in a not too loud voice. Most of them were out cold. One was snoring into the cushion. Another was leaning so far forward his chest was on his lap. "You won't mind if I borrow one of your vehicles, would you?" Pam looked around the gathered men. Nobody moved or spoke. Pam looked over her shoulder as if about to do something wrong. What will Mom think? Pam looked at the set of keys hanging from a carabiner hooked to a really round guy's belt. She reached over and unhooked the key. Gee, thank you, sir, for helping out a young girl in need." Pam turned and ran for the doors. Well, she walked as fast as she could. "Look for a huge 4x4 painted to look like a forest," Pam said. "How do you know that's what it looked like?" Belle was hugging herself, trying to stay warm. They had left Sarah to keep an eye on their stolen goods. By the looks of the guy, he would drive nothing else. Pam tried to see as far as she could. Way back in the distant part of the lot sat a vehicle that looked to fit the bill. Pam walked towards it, pushing the key fob. The horn went off. Belle had to cup her ears. What was that sound? Once Pam was standing next to the truck, she considered going back and trying a different person. The running boards were at her shoulders. Wow, how do we get in? Belle tried jumping to see if she could see in the window. Give me a lift." Pam reached up and grabbed the running board. Belle reached down and got Pam's foot, and she lifted. "For such a skinny kid, you sure are heavy." Belle made lifting noises. "Gee, thanks." Pam was pulling herself up with her arms. Once she could reach the door handle, she opened the door and tried to pull herself into the vehicle. Pam got one hand up around the steering wheel. Her foot found something to push down on. She wormed her way into the cab. "Give me your hand." She reached down. Belle grabbed Pam's hand. "Did you have to step on my head?" Belle's wig was on sideways, and the feather was now over her ear. Pam pulled. She nearly fell out the door. The stranglehold on the steering wheel was the only thing that saved her. Belle managed to get up and into the vehicle. Now she was sitting in Pam's lap. "Remember what you said about weighing so much?" Belle quickly scooted over. Pam stuck the key in the ignition. The engine came to life with a loud, throaty rumble. "Ooh, headers." Pam scooted the seat as far forward as it would go and put the monster into gear. Without even putting her foot on the gas, the truck moved out at about 15 miles an hour. Pam had to stop short of the entryway. The pickup's roof was higher than the overhang. Pam opened the door and looked down at the ground. Darn it! After carefully dropping from the driver's door, Pam and Belle hoisted Sarah up into the bed of the truck. Then they handed up all of the Indian artifacts and the weapons from the chief's office. Pam held her arms out. "Jump and I'll catch you." "Why don't you just open the back window and I'll crawl in?" Sarah looked down at Pam. Cats are running around being crazy again. Pam had left the driver's door open, so she just reached way up and pushed the back window open button. Next, her and Belle got busy reenacting their earlier mountaineering exercise. As Pam was getting under the wheel, a stepladder appeared in between the seats. "Why don't you try this?" Sarah had found it in the back seat. Pam got heading down south. The snow was deeper than it had been. Now, with her overpowered pickup, the trip was less stressful. She tried to think of how they would handle all of the zombies in order to get to the king. Sarah, can you reach the arrows in the back and that box of arrowheads?" Pam looked back and saw the woodland camouflaged image climbing out the window. Sarah stuck her head back in the window. There's a bag full of army clothes in the back seat. Sarah shoved the box full of arrowheads and the quivers of arrows onto the back seat. The arrows were all new, aluminum shafts with steel heads. Pam looked at Sarah in the rearview mirror. Now, pull the modern arrowheads off and replace them with the quartz heads. Pam pulled something from her gown. Use this to attach them. She held out a tube of superglue. Belle was perfectly happy to sit and watch the countryside go whisking by. Everything was mostly white, but it was still better than the inside of a tomb. She looked over the seat at the girl working diligently. The witch looked back at the scenery. Oh, phooey. This isn't right. Belle clomb over the console into the back seat. She got busy pulling the heads of the arrows as Sarah glued the quartz in place. Ham drove while her two companions worked. It sounded as if they were getting along a lot better than ever before. This misadventure was turning out all right, kind of. Well, except for the fact that she still had no idea how she was going to get close enough to King Hep to do any kind of damage. What would her dad do? Call the SWAT team and let them do their thing. What would her mom do? Call the National Guard and then go along to see to it they did what she would told them to do. What would Mr. Armstrong do? Go in there with guns ablazing. Pam had her plan. She just wished she had more guns. Pam straightened her gown out as best she could. It was torn and dirty, but it still looked just enough like a queen to hopefully get them past the guards. She looked in the mirror and ran her fingers through the wig to get it looking more royal and less bird nest. The golden cobra head looked back at her from the top. Belle had found some camouflage face paint and smeared it all over Sarah to get her to look as dead as possible. Here, you might want a bit of a green touch up, maybe a little brown too. That way you look more dead than alive. Let's move as quickly as we can. The sooner we get down to the tomb, the sooner we'll be warm. They all jumped out, and Sarah threw the bag of army clothes out the back door. They gathered around and worked. Pam walked along as if she owned the world. She put as much racy swing in her hips as she could. She hoped this would draw attention away from her followers. Belle and Sarah were carrying what looked like a body between them. Sarah had the legs and Belle the shoulders. The body had been hastily put together using the uniforms from the army bag. It kind of looked like a dead guy if you didn't look too close. In the light of day, it looked like a jacket and a pair of pants stuffed with clothes. Hopefully, once they were inside the tomb, it would look better. The entrance was just ahead. Pam had to grit her teeth and keep herself from pulling this off. It might mean a lot of folks would die. She prayed this wasn't going to be a one-way trip. Sarah was freezing. It would have been nice to keep that jacket on, at least until we got inside. The gown she had on did nothing to stop the wind. Belle hated this whole mission. How many times have we escaped only to walk back into the tomb of doom? Let's see, we ran into the mine, then we escaped out the entrance. Then we walked back in the entrance and escaped out the air shaft. Now we're walking back in through the entrance again. 3 and 2. 3 trips in and 2 escapes. Sarah thought this was the wrong thing to be doing. Remind me, why are we doing this again? Belle thought this was the stupidest thing she'd done all week. You guys keep quiet. We're almost there. Pam put on as much I am a queen as she could muster. The entrance wasn't guarded. This caused Pam more concern than had it been manned by a few dead guys. She walked into the dark tunnel and tried to be brave. The darkness closed in on them. Now that the wind was no longer on them, they felt just a tiny bit better. They walked along as if they belonged here. Ahead, Pam spotted a group of zombies. These looked better than most. Some were mostly there. They had on suits and ties. The women were dressed in fancy gowns. As Pam picked her way by them, the dead turned towards her and then bowed. The three girls tried to walk calmly away, leaving the zombies shuffling along behind them. "That went well," Pam whispered to her followers. By the light of the oil lamps, Pam could see zombies ahead. Each group they passed was bigger than the last. As they rounded a corner, they came to a wall of undead. Pam poked one of the zombies in the arm. It turned to look at her. It looked at the golden cobra sticking out of her black wib. It bowed. The dead guy poked the arm of the next zombie, who did the same. Soon there was an opening just wide enough to walk by. Pam did more of her royal person walking until she hit one of the zombies with her hip. She had to tone it down a bit. Stepping out on top of the ramp, Pam looked out at the mass of dead bodies. Her courage tried to run, find some place to hide. She could feel her knees begin to shake once more. "Didn't I already do this once?" she mumbled under her breath. And there was that smell again. It greeted her like a long lost dead fish. The king was yelling to his gathered army. He spoke only in Egyptian. Some of the zombies cheered and shook their fists at the roof. Others just looked around with a confused look on their dried out faces. Dr. Ibibad translated. "His Royal Highness King Imsohep wishes to instill in his loyal subjects the understanding that in just a few hours you will spread out across this planet and destroy all who do not worship at his feet." The king yelled some more in Egyptian. "His Magnanimous Highness wishes for you to also locate his recently obtained and suddenly missing bride and bring her for his royal amusement." Ham caught this last bit just about the same time that everybody else in the room, all the zombies between her and the dais, moved out of the way, giving King Imsohep a clear view of his missing bride. The king yelled in Egyptian. He did some more of that evil laughing that he was so good at. One of the Egyptian looking zombies took it upon himself to push Pam towards the king. Pam decided she didn't want to continue with her plan and turned to run. The zombie lifted her up onto his shoulder. Pam watched as Sarah and Belle got farther away as the zombie carried her to her mummy husband. I need to come up with a different way of referring to him. She tried to escape. Pam did her best all the way to the top of the raised platform. She was ever so gently dropped to the floor. Pam had to take a second to catch her breath. She looked out at the sea of dead. They were all looking at the creature standing just behind her. Pam rolled over to face her looming spouse. King Imsohep reached down and grabbed Pam in one steel hand. He yanked her to her feet. Pam would have gone flying across the stage had her arm not been held tightly. Her arm was just able to stay attached at the shoulder. The king walked across the stage and he shoved Pam down onto the right-hand throne. Pam was so glad to be out of his grip she stayed put. The king turned back to his subjects and continued giving his battle plan. He began yelling in Egyptian some more. He did some more of that sinister laughing sound as well. Belle was all in favor of running for the door and getting the heck out of here. She pushed her end of the body and managed to get Sarah going in the right direction. The two had to push and prod the zombies out of the way. Some moved with little encouragement, while others just gave the two a dirty look. It was all Belle could do to hold her tongue. Sarah saw a side tunnel just ahead, and she made for it. The tunnel was smaller than most, but it was also devoid of zombies. She slipped into it with Belle right behind her. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, breathing hard. "We continue on with the mission." Belle hated the idea, but she felt as if she were trapped. Pam was counting on them to do the right thing. Pam looked out over the zombies. She hoped and prayed that Belle and Sarah had escaped and were at this very moment running for the oversized pickup. Who would drive? She was sure one of them could figure it out. Imhotep finished his tirade and stormed over to his throne. He sat down as if this in itself was an act of war. Looking at Pam, he placed one hand on her knee. Pam tried to push the offending extremity away. She would have had an easier time moving the stone wall behind her. "Oh, please get away from here and get help." Pam sent her friends a prayer. Belle and Sarah followed the tunnel as it ran behind the dais. It turned and the tunnel went up. They soon stood in the dark, right behind the royal seating. There was a sliver of light coming through the wall. Belle had her eye up to the slit. "What do you see? Is it Pam? Is she okay?" Sarah was beside herself with fear for her friend. Belle could see the back of the thrones. But which one? "A lot of good this will do us. How can we move these stones?" Belle thought about this. If she was a witch, she should have some kind of a power to move things. Just maybe she could pull this off. Belle stepped back and motioned to Sarah to stand aside. The witch placed her hands an inch from the stone she wished to move. She called forth the power from deep within her being. Nothing happened. She got mad. She forced more energy into her hands. Things began to get warm, then hot. Her fingertips were glowing. The stone lit up like a weak light bulb. It glowed for a few seconds, and then it went dim again. Belle felt more than spent. "Darn it, I thought I had it." She slapped the stone with her hand, and it slid away as if it weighed nothing. Pam was sitting bolt upright in her chair. The dais was ringed by hundreds of guards, all armed to the teeth. She was looking for any means of possible of getting away from here before her one true hate remembered she was there. The king was busy looking at a map being held in front of him by four zombies. Each had a corner. Pam could see it was a map of northern Texas and Oklahoma. Dr. Ibibad was pointing a finger at El Paso. He said things in Egyptian, and the king smiled. The doctor looked over at Pam. He smiled in an unfriendly manner. "I was just telling our great and powerful king about all the weapons he could acquire by attacking Fort Bliss in El Paso. The 1st Armored Division is there, and with those tanks, the king will be unstoppable." "Oh, yeah? Who are you going to get to man a bunch of tanks? Zombies?" Pam tried smiling, but it didn't work very well. "Why, of course. See those dead men over by the wall? Combat veterans, every one. It only take them 3 days to walk there. The zombies were all standing at various stages of attention." Pam thought that would be something cool to see. Zombies in tanks. Wow. Something bumped the back of her chair. The king felt it too. He turned his burning red eyes on Pam. A sinister smile crept over his face. He leaned towards Pam. His lips were kind of sticking out in a kissing manner. Pam tried to lean as far from the advancing lips as she could. It smelled like something very dead and very rotten. The king began to lean even closer. As he was about to pull Pam over to him, Belle popped up between them. The king planted a cold, dry kiss right on her mouth. Belle had tried to wiggle out between the thrones so she could grab Pam and pull her back into the tunnel. Just as she was about to get her friend, something smelly smacked into her. Ugh! I kissed the dead! I'm contaminated! It touched me! I'm going to die! Somebody call my mom! Tell her I love her! Belle slid to the floor unconscious. Pam jumped to her feet. She got Belle by the shoulders and pushed. The witch slid back through the hole in the wall, and Pam scrambled right behind her. As Pam came slithering through the opening, Sarah pushed the light as styrofoam block back into place. The king leaped to his feet and flung the throne out of his way. He looked at the stone wall behind him, but his bride had slipped from his grasp once more. He yelled something in Egyptian. He kicked the stone right in front of him. Fortunately for the girls, it was the wrong stone. Dr. Ibybad was rounding up guards to go looking for the queen once more as the king went limping back and forth. Ham and Sarah were carrying Belle along the small dark corridor. They had no idea where they were going, but it was away from the throne room full of zombies. The pile of clothes they had brought into the tomb was piled on Belle's chest. Sarah had her feet. What happened? Why is she unconscious? Did the mummy king smack her in the head? More like on the lips. Pam was trying not to laugh. He kissed her, and she swooned. Swooned? What's that? She fainted. Pam began to laugh at her companion's condition. I think this might have been her first kiss. Pam nearly dropped the witch. Sarah was even more confused. You mean he planted his lips on hers, and this led to her passing out? It must have smelled like death. Pam hadn't thought of this. Ooh! Pam felt bad about having laughed at Belle. So, I guess you've kissed a lot of guys, huh? Sarah looked at Pam as if not about to believe anything she said. Well, not lots, no, but I've kissed a few guys. She didn't mention the few guys were her dad, her uncle, and their minister, all before she'd even become a teenager, and always on the cheek. Her mom didn't count, not being a guy. Belle had listened to all of this hooey. She could. I did not faint. I hit my head on something. Sarah let go of her legs. So, did his breath smell like dead fish or what? She gave Belle a look of anticipation of her next announcement. Actually, a load of dead fish would have been a relief compared to what it was like. Belle had a quick thought of other things to keep from gagging. She tried rubbing her mouth on her sleeve, but she didn't have a sleeve. Pam felt sick just thinking about it. It could have been her he was mushing his bloodless cold lips on. Ugh. Once they'd finished trying to gross each other out, Pam said, let's get going. We still need to deal with King Imsohep, and I don't know if this is going to work or not. She opened the camouflage jacket, pulled out a bow and a quiver of arrows. She handed them to Sarah. Pulling out a second bow and arrows, Pam handed these to Belle. The last set of weapons were hers. Each of them got a tomahawk and a stone knife. Okay, now we just have to wait until the king is alone. Pam listened to the tunnel. There had been no sound of pursuit as they fled along the tunnel, but Pam had continued just in case. Now it was time to head back to the throne room. They moved along as quickly as three young girls could. Pam thought she was making way too much noise, but compared to her companions, she was as quiet as a ghost. As they got closer to the throne room, the sound of zombies getting all pumped up for battle began to increase. Pam had visions of thousands of undead, all shouting with damaged vocal cords and waving bits and pieces of their appendages in the air. The closer they got, the louder the crowd became. Pam stopped in the corridor that was just behind the throne. Belle pointed out the crack where you could see into the room. Pam got her eye right up against the tiny opening. The scene was just as she had envisioned. The king was parading back and forth, enlivening the zombie army to go out and destroy the world. He kept yelling and screaming in Egyptian. The doctor translated for those zombies that didn't speak Egyptian, which was about 99% of them. Go forth and vanquish the enemies of our sovereign leader, so he might take his rightful place as ruler of the world. The zombie army all made a kind of a sound. As one, they turned for the ramp leading up and out. They began to march. Should I break here since it's been an hour? No, I will continue. I don't have a whole lot left to go. It took quite a while for any indication of zombies leaving the room. Slowly, the crowd began to thin out. Pam got tired of watching, and Sarah took a turn. Belle just waved her hand. She didn't want to look. Ever so slowly, the sounds of zombies yelling and marching grew from ear splitting to just headache causing to what you'd expect during a football game, and then what you would get during a golf tournament. In other words, it was getting quiet. Now's our chance. The zombies are gone, mostly, and the king is only guarded by. Pam looked through the tiny slit. 10 or 50 guards. She could see only a very front of the dais. So what's the plan? Pam was holding an arrow in one hand and the bow in the other. The bows Pam had grabbed from the chief's office looked like old time Indian bows, only they were made of fiberglass. Belle knew about archery from her time in the Girl Scouts. We slip quickly down the side tunnel to the very edge of the stage and fill his carcass with arrows. Hopefully, the quartz arrowheads will have some kind of a magical effect. Belle thought this was a very bad plan, since they weren't even sure the mummy could be killed. Can you kill someone who's already dead? Sarah was holding her bow out at arm's length. She was having difficulty keeping the arrow alongside the bow. How do you drive this thing? Belle tried to show her how to nock an arrow and then pull back on the string. Yes, that's what it's called, a nock. Pam led the way down the side tunnel. It was quiet. This only made her feel uneasier. It was as if the guards were waiting for them to show themselves before launching their attack. The snowplow was pushing a wide wave up and over to the right side as it moved along the road. They had only just left town. The call had come in just before sunup asking to check on some girls who were staying in a cabin near the base of the Guadalupe Mountains. Deputy Hanrahan had taken the call. He had to contact the local garage and ask them to fire up the snowplow. The owner of the garage had informed the deputy the snowplow was down for repairs, so Deputy Hanrahan had to wait as the mechanic put the ancient army truck back together and mounted a plow on the front bumper. Once the plow was up and running, the truck headed south towards Highway 62. From there, they turned east and made a path to where the side road should take them to the cabin. Deputy Hanrahan was in the passenger seat. The truck was about as uncomfortable today as it had been 50 years ago when the Army was still using it. The cold wind blew in through every crack and gap as snow was piling up on the floor at his feet. The driver was slowing down. What's that up ahead? It looks like somebody walking down the middle of the road. The deputy sat forward and wiped the frost from the windshield. It looks like several somebodies. He strained to see through the windshield. The driver hit the brakes. It looks like something out of a horror movie. What are those things? A Deputy Hanrahan grabbed his walkie-talkie. Dispatch, can you check and see if the Army is conducting maneuvers out on Highway 62? And if not, is somebody filming a movie, like maybe a horror movie out here? The entire highway, as well as both sides of it, was covered with an assortment of people, all walking through the snow as if the cold and the blowing flurries was nothing. As they drew closer, the deputy could see what looked like zombies, thousands of them coming their way. All of them were waving swords or spears or sometimes sticks in the air. What should I do? Ram them or drive back the way we came? Plowing snow was one thing, but plowing zombies was not in his contract. Will that salt in the back of the truck kill them? I don't think so. I think you got to shoot them in the head. The driver had seen a movie once that said so. How much ammo did you bring? Hanrahan was making calculations in his head. Let's see, I got maybe none. I was told this was a snowplowing job, not a zombie apocalypse job. These doors don't have any locks. If we plow through that mass, we'll be zombie food for sure. The engine sputtered to show the reliability of its engine. Maybe we should head back and round up a few thousand more men with guns and things. The driver threw the truck in reverse and hit the gas, although it was a diesel. The vehicle sped backwards down the freshly plowed highway. The zombies continued their march to El Paso. Pam knocked an arrow on the string of her bow. She tried a few test pulls to be sure she was ready. Her arm was already sore from pulling herself into that oversized pickup, pulling Belle into the same pickup, carrying Belle several times, and all the other abuse she'd put her body through. You guys ready? We slip up onto the stage and make King Imsohep look like a porcupine. Without waiting for an answer, Pam stepped out from the side corridor and began sneaking up the stairs. All the guards were lined up along the front of the dais. They looked like an army of bouncers waiting for the nightclub hordes to arrive. Each held either a sword or some kind of a club. Pam tried to ignore her inner voice that kept telling her to turn back before it was too late. She could feel the stone under her thin-soled sandals. As the top of the dais came into view, Pam could see King Imsohep sitting in his throne. Her throne was a pile of broken wood next to his. The doctor was nowhere to be seen. Pam stretched the bowstring and lined up her shot. She cleared the top of the stage and let fly. The arrow sailed straight and true right for its target. The twanging sound let Pam know that Belle had fired her bow as well. Sarah fired her arrow and then opened her eyes to see if she'd missed. Her arrow went up and hit one of the statues of Anubis. It made a cracking sound as the quartz hit stone. Without waiting to see if the arrow had hit home, Pam knocked the next arrow. The first and second arrows hit King Imsohep in the center of his chest. The stone tips went right through and out the other side. The king leapt to his feet. A third and fourth arrow found their places. The guards began to move towards the three girls. Pam fired again as she tried to move away from the guards without getting too close to the mummies. Bell turned and shot the closest zombie in the head. The arrow went out the back along with a good-sized piece of his brain. Sarah dropped her bow. She had to bend down to retrieve it. As she was getting back to her feet, she accidentally let go of the second arrow, and it gave off a resounding crack as it hit the statue in the knee. The mummy began to advance on the three attackers. King Imsohep began to laugh as he got closer and closer. He pointed one finger at Pam and then ran it along his throat. Without the doctor around to translate, Pam had to just guess as to what he was thinking of doing. It looked very unpleasant, and it looked like it was for her. Belle pulled on Pam's arm. The time to run. Again. She pointed to the guards that were almost on top of them. Pam pushed Sarah towards the edge of the stage. Belle took the stairs three at a time. The sound of creaking came to them from above. Pam looked back. There was the king, right at the edge of the dais. He waved his arms at the guards. The guards shuffled closer, trapping the three girls in a corner. The sound of something breaking with a loud snap filled the air. King Imhotep crossed his arms over his chest. He had to break off several arrows to accomplish this lordly stance. Pam tried to protect the others with her body. This seemed like a wasted effort, but she felt compelled to do something for her friends. Kathy is not happy about something. Belle tried to cast a spell, any spell that would protect them. She waved her hands about. She gestured in every determined way. She even tried to cast a spell that would make their coming deaths not so painful. Sarah clamped her eyes shut and hugged Pam's waist. The guards were an arm's length away. What sounded like a rifle shot filled the air. A handful of stones hit the floor at Pam's feet. This was followed by a few bigger stones. As King Amsohep stood there at the top of the stairs, gazing down at the three girls, he suddenly vanished as one of the statues of Anubis came crashing down on him. Pam turned her back and closed her eyes. She tried to shield Sarah and Belle from the collapsing roof. The air filled with dust and debris, and everything went black. Should I stop here or keep going? No, I'm going to keep going. Chapter 8. We're not done yet. Pam awoke laying on her back. The room was still dark. She listened for the sound of anyone or anything around them. Something came down hard in the middle of her stomach. Pam yelled and sat straight up, and her head collided with something hard in the dark. Ow! I hit my head on something, Belle groaned. Oh, sorry, I hit your head with my head. They both had to wait for the stars to disappear. Pam ran her hands along the floor. There was something soft and squishy under them. Sarah tried pushing whatever it was off of her chest so she could breathe. What happened? Are we dead yet? She held her hands in front of her face, but she couldn't see anything. Belle tried snapping her fingers. There was a blue spark. She snapped them again and again. A small blue flame appeared at the end of her finger. The three looked around. There was a huge pile of rocks scattered across the floor. The zombie guards were all just laying in whatever position they'd fallen. Belle spotted one of the oil lamps, crawled over to it, and she stuck her finger into the oil, and the room jumped into light. The roof had not fallen in. One of the statues of Anubis had collapsed. It was broken just below the knees. The enormous head had come flying down and was now sitting on the floor right next to the three girls. King Imhotep's head was just visible from underneath it. His eyes were black and empty. Do you think his army of undead is dead? Or deader? Belle looked at the guards all laying on the floor around them. I hope so. If not, we'll have to convince Fort Bliss to send out the army to stop them. Pam didn't want to even think about that possibility. They walked up the tunnel that took them to the entrance, or exit, depending on which direction you were walking. As they got closer to the exit, the air got colder. Did we stash some blankets around here someplace? Pam asked. They found their stash, and everybody got busy wrapping themselves up to try to stave off the cold. The light of day was a welcome sight. Pam had left the stepladder by the driver's door so they could get back in. She should have gone last so the others could get in, but Pam was used to leading the way, so she crawled in under the wheel. Then Sarah had to climb over her to get into the back seat. Belle tried to not step on Pam as she entered, but her foot did come down in the wrong parts. They all got as comfortable as they could. Let's drive out and check on the zombie army and then take this truck back to its owner. Pam hit the gas and they drove south to the highway. Pam slowed down when she came to the first body. It looked like one of the army guys the king was going to use to drive the tanks. The zombie now just looked like a dead soldier. Pam looked at him. Are you going to be all right? She asked. The ghost stood up and looked around him. Golly, Miss Molly, how did I wind up out here in the middle of nowhere? Sarah tried to see the ghost from the back window, but all she saw was the body. Where were you buried? Fort Bliss Cemetery. The ghost looked around. Guess I best get walking. I have a long march a comin'. Pam looked at her two companions. We should do something with his body. It's not right to just leave it laying there all by itself. Belle looked at Pam as if she had lost her mind. Pam, not Belle. And just how do you propose we do? It would take a crane and a few big guys to get it up into the bed of this truck. Pam looked at the dead soldier and then started driving west. Soon they came to a pile of no longer zombies. It looked like a scene from a horror movie. There were thousands of bodies in every size and shape. Some were dressed in suits, while others had on very little. Most were dressed to look sort of like Egyptians. They all had one thing in common. These were the former members of King Imhotep's army. Pam stopped before she damaged anyone. Hey, are you the girls that used to be staying in a cabin at the base of Guadalupe Mountains? A deputy yelled from the far side of the bodies. There were a few dozen men, all carrying rifles of every size, behind him. Yes, sir. Pam wondered what she should say. Uh, any idea where all these dead guys might have come from? She tried to act as if she had no clue. Not a glimmer. Somebody is going to have to pay to get all these dead folks put back in their graves where they come from. He looked at Pam, dressed the way she was. You don't know anything about this, do you? He eyed her suspiciously. There's one more dead guy back that way a mile or so. Pam looked at her two companions. Let's go before that deputy asks any more questions. They almost ran back to the truck. As they came to George's cabin, they stopped so Belle could run in and get her gold fungus. She came back carrying everyone's backpack as well. Pam drove back to the casino and pulled into the parking lot. She parked as close to the spot the truck had been just this morning. I'll get rid of the keys and then we need to find a ride back to the cabin. Why not just call George and ask him to come pick us up? The snow looked like it's melting. Belle was trying to make a snowball to hit somebody with. That someone turned out to be Sarah. Sarah immediately launched one back at her. Pam walked into the casino looking as if the place had been robbed, followed by a hurricane, that had been followed by a bad slumber party. Most everyone was asleep. Passed out in is more like it. Most of them were around the bar. Once somebody had discovered the bar was unattended and therefore free, everyone had helped themselves to way too much. Someone had knocked over a few slot machines trying to get them to cough up their winnings. The machines were made of tougher stuff than their assailants. There were dents all over, but none of them were open. The smell hanging over the room was nearly as bad as the zombies. She went over to the men dressed in camel, who were all snoring by this time. Pam tried to remember which one had had the key ring. She clipped it to a skinny guy's belt laying on the floor. Thank you so much for the use of your truck. Pam turned to rejoin her friends. The ghost of the old Indian was standing there looking at her. I take it you found what you needed to defeat the enemy from across the ocean. Pam thought about how the arrows had no effect on the mummy. Yes, but the arrows went right through without killing the mummy. Arrows? I was referring to the magic sandals, made from the grass of the sacred plant. The old guy looked at Pam. You were supposed to use them to turn invisible so you could sneak up on the dead guy and clobber him in the head. Pam remembered Sarah saying something about grass sandals. No, well, instead we dropped a statue on him. I don't think we'll be seeing any more of that guy around here. Pam looked around at all the destruction. Man, Chief Walking Eagle is going to be mad when he sees this mess. Do you think the place will ever recover? The old Indian looked around at what Pam was talking about. Are you kidding me? It will take maybe a week to fix this place up. The chief has wanted to remodel for years now. This will get him started. Besides, they take in a lot more each day than this little event. The old Indian turned and started walking away. He disappeared before he was halfway across the room. Belle was hiding behind the hood of a car. She was covered from head to foot with bits of snowball. Sarah was slowly sneaking along in between two buses. Once she got to the back bumper, she stuck her head out. A thought had interrupted her game. Belle, what do you think ever happened to that crazy doctor that brought the mummy back to life? Belle was struck by the question. She stuck her head up to answer and got hit in the face by a snowball. I don't know, maybe he got squished by the falling statue. Dr. Ibybad had been hiding in the bed of that oversized pickup. He managed to slip out of the tunnel and was running for the hills when he spotted the vehicle. Not knowing the keys were in the ignition, he'd sought refuge in the back. He could hear the two girls yelling from the other side of some buses, so he sat up and looked around. This will work out nicely. The doctor was renting a room in the casino hotel. Unwittingly, Pam had driven the mad doctor right to his doorstep. Being dressed like an Egyptian high priest, the doctor would have attracted attention had there been anyone around to see him as he walked quickly across the parking lot. I'll make that girl wish she'd never married my king. Something hit him in the back of the head. The doctor turned and looked, but he didn't see who had pelted him with a snowball. He made for the casino doors. Belle had chunked a snowball at Sarah, but missed. It flew over her head and hit some guy walking through the parking lot. The two girls both dove for cover, not wanting to be accused and accosted and yelled at by some unknown stranger. Pam was still wearing her mummy costume. The wig had seen better days. There were little bits and pieces of broken statue sticking out here and there. The extra thick hair had kept Pam from receiving too much damage. The linen wrappings were as dirty as could be. This only made her look more like one of the undead than ever. I need to find some scissors and cut this thing off. The white gown was closer to being black. At least the gold cobra was still bright and shiny. Pam thought about her search for the chief's office. There had been some scissors in one of the drawers. They had a few hours before George and Wanda would arrive. She went to see about getting out of these wrappings. The elevator doors opened and Pam stepped in. She pushed the button for the second floor just as a man came running over and stepped in next to her. He said, 10, please. Then he looked at Pam. Pam looked back. The man standing in the elevator with her was Dr. Ibybad. How did he manage to catch up with her so fast? How did you get here so fast? She asked without thinking. I was hiding in the bed of... Oh, never mind. You will pay for what you have done to my king. The doors opened on the second floor, but Ibybad held Pam in an iron grasp. He was stronger than he looked, and Pam was on her last. He kept her held in place as the elevator made the top floor. The doctor dragged Pam along the corridor heading to his room. He had one of the nicest rooms in the entire building. It was costing the university a bundle, but they didn't know, and he didn't care. He shoved Pam up against the wall and felt in his pockets for his keys. Egyptian priests' gowns didn't have pockets, but the doctor had his specially designed. He found the card and pushed it into the slot. The door swung open, and Pam was thrown across the threshold. She landed on the floor, too worn out to resist. The room was actually a suite. The kitchenette was part of the living room. A door led into the bedroom. The place was freshly cleaned and looked impressive. There was a ton of Egyptian artifacts set in every open space in the room. It looked more like a museum than a hotel room. The doctor closed and locked the door. He then turned towards his prisoner. I am going to finish what those incompetent zombie priests began. Pam looked down at her mummy wrappings. It looks like they did a good job. Maybe I could use some cleaner linens, but other than that, enough. Dr. Ibab grabbed a necklace from one of the shelves. He got the chain around Pam's neck. Her entire body felt tingly. Ah! Cats are tearing up the office. Okay, her body felt tingly. He lifted her up onto the counter. This is going to hurt far worse than anything you've ever experienced. He turned from her and began opening drawers. He was looking for something. Pam could not move at all. She thought this was her chance to leap off the counter, smack him in the head with something hard but not too valuable, and then run for the door. She tried to swing one leg over the edge. She tried some more. Her leg wasn't answering her brain. Pam tried to lift her hand, but it seemed to be on strike as well. She could feel her fingers resting against the rough linen of her costume, but try as she might, nothing moved. The counter felt hard against her back. She could feel everything. She just couldn't move. It's got to be this necklace. The doctor found what he was looking for. He walked over to Pam, holding a huge knife. I am going to do a complete mummification on you. You will be conscious and alert through the entire process. He thumbed the edge of the knife. Scowling, he looked around the room. I need a knife sharpener. I'll be right back. He walked to the door, but turned at the last second. Don't go away. He laughed as he stepped out the closed door. Pam was so glad the room didn't come equipped with a complete surgical suite. She was also glad the knife they had provided was inadequate for the doctor's needs. Now what? Pam thought as she tried to get some part of her to respond to her wishes. She was feeling less and less optimistic as the minutes slipped by. I simply have to track y'all down and thank you for saving my men and I from following that less than honorable king. Captain Chapman was standing in the middle of the room. Pam could just see him from the corner of her eye. Thank God you're here. Quick, take this necklace off me so I can escape. Pam thought hard, trying to send the words from her mind. She tried to point out the offending jewelry. She could only stare straight at the ceiling. Oh, I had no idea you seemed to be in any kind of a predicament. The captain moved over to her side. Pam could now see he was dressed in his cavalry uniform. It looked as impressive as Lieutenant Brambleberry, more so since he was a captain. The captain looked at Pam laying on the counter. You look as if you're frozen in place. He looked questioningly at her. What is it you wish for me to do? He looked some more. Pam tried to say something, but even her mouth was being held shut by some otherworldly force. Captain Chapman looked at Pam. He saw the huge knife laying on the floor. He scratched his head, which was still missing, but covered by his hat. This here fancy neckwear looks as if it has been cursed by some demon from beyond the grave. He very gently reached to the center of Pam's chest. He grasped the necklace and lifted. His hand came away empty. It would seem as if I am unable to hang on to this piece of jewelry. Pam felt close to panic. Try again. Maybe if you think about what you're doing, Pam screamed inside her head. She remembered how Sharma was able to lift the book and move things. Her and Dan had cleared out an entire office that used to belong to Hans Hansenson, so ghosts could move things around. How did they do it? Perhaps if I close my eyes, it will trick my mind into thinking I can lift said necklace. The captain closed his eyes and reached for the jewelry. Pam watched as the captain's hand passed right through her chest. It felt weird. It looked weirder. He looked as solid as anyone, but he was still a ghost with one hand buried in her chest. His hand came back out from her body. As it drew away, the necklace moved just a bit. Pam felt a jolt of electricity when it moved. Try again, you almost got it, she yelled inside her mind. The captain reached down once more. This time he was able to lift the Egyptian charm into the air. As the jewel encrusted charm lost contact with her skin, her muscles answered her orders. Pam reached around her neck and unhooked the chain. Ah, it would appear as if I have repaid you for your most courageous actions earlier. The captain sounded a lot like the lieutenant. The same flowery speech. Just then the door swung open and Dr. Ibybad came strolling in. He was holding a collection of very sharp, very dangerous knives that he had borrowed from the kitchen. Pam laid back down and acted as if still under the spell. She didn't have to act scared because she still had no idea what to do to defeat the madman. The doctor set all the knives on the counter and then went looking for some scissors. He needed to remove those bandages before he could get to the heart of things. This made him chuckle. As soon as the doctor was on the other side of the room, Pam sprang to her feet. She shoved all the knives into the sink, hanging on to the biggest, sharpest one. Then she held it like a sword. The doctor spun around in surprise. How do you keep escaping from my traps? He advanced on her, thinking he might still defeat her. Pam had never killed anyone. The very thought of it made her knees weak. She felt like being very sick. Okay, looks like I'm going to add you to my long list of folks that I've killed. She gave this her best crazy look. The doctor looked at this young girl with a big knife. She looked scared. You're bluffing. He rushed her. Pam swung the knife in an arc which would miss the doctor, but did spin her around. She felt as if. Try that again. That didn't make any sense. Pam swung the knife in an arc which missed the doctor, but did spin her around. She felt as the captain shoved her just as her attacker tried to grab hold. Pam went sideways, and the doctor's head slammed into the countertop. He slumped to the floor unconscious. The captain gave Pam a worried look. I do so hope you don't mind my interceding on your behalf. You looked as if you had him where you wanted him. Pam got back to her feet. Thanks, I really appreciate your help. She thought about her next idea. Ah, there's a bunch of Confederate soldiers that stay at a building where our offices are. If you ever come through town, maybe you'd like to stop by and visit. They have their own nightclub. The captain had a few things to say before he vanished. He did promise to come by and check out the nightlife. Pam found some rope and tied the doctor up, and she then went looking for the authorities. Pam had just hung up the phone. She'd been on it talking to the state police. They'd shown absolutely no interest in anything she'd said about a room full of stolen Egyptian artifacts. When Pam switched to saying they were stolen Indian artifacts, they said they'd be right over. Pam sat down in the lobby and immediately fell asleep. She'd been going for far too long, and the only time she wasn't fighting for her life or running, she'd been unconscious. Pam was dreaming she was swimming in a sea of coffee. It had just the right amount of cream and sugar. She stuck her head under and took a drink. Ah, this is heaven. Sarah kept passing a cup back and forth under Pam's nose, trying to wake her up. Hey, sleepyhead, let's go so we can get home sometime this year. George and Wanda stood a few feet away, unsure of whether the mummy Pam was safe to get close to. Pam managed to get one eye open. Man, am I glad to see you guys. As they were letting each other know how much fun they'd had all over the last couple of days, two Oklahoma State police came from the elevator dragging Dr. Ibebad between them. You can't do this to me. Do you know who I am? I'll see you in court, he fumed as they escorted him out the doors. George looked at the officers as they put the doctor into the back seat of the state patrol car and drove away. Wonder why they're arresting the doctor. He's the one that said I only had a short time to decide about that Indian village they found on my property. Pam looked at George. Wait, you mean you're not dying? Dying? What gave you that idea? George had a confused look on his face. Pam thought back to the party. George had said the doctor said I don't have much time left to make a decision. Part had been lost when he fell asleep. Pam was relieved to find out he wasn't dying from some mysterious disease. Belle was already asleep in the back seat of Pam's truck. Sarah snuggled in next to Belle. She had decided the witch was okay. Pam had thought about finding some clothes and changing into human things, but she was way too tired. Maybe once they got home. George got them heading east towards 285 in Oklahoma. Pam had a thought pop into her head. Miss Murkowski, what were you thinking about for the past 6 years and a few months? It's Miss Zimbalinski now, and I sat down at the coffee bar to consider whether to say yes or not. Yes to marrying George? There are some things you don't want to rush into. You don't marry the first man who asks you, you know. I had to keep renewing the license every 2 months, George added. I wanted to be ready when she said yes. He smiled at her. It's a good thing I own a gold mine. I hope you enjoyed the Bag Company Head West or Go West. It was a tongue twister to say the least, some of the Egyptian words and names. Do not fret. I will be back someday with the next exciting story about Pam Bogus and the Bag Company. The next story, if I can find the right mouse, is called UFOs Attack the Bag Company. More thrills and chills and spills, more damage to Pam's wardrobe, more monsters, more nasty things happening. Hope you enjoyed the show. Until next time, this is Chris James for Storytime.